The house I lived in was an old, dilapidated, pre-war two-story building with creaking floors, shabby walls, a shared kitchen, toilet, and shower. The cockroaches crawling all over the walls were another shared problem, though frankly, no one in the house seemed to care much, at least not on my floor. My neighbors were elderly men and women living out their final days, and cockroaches were probably the least of their worries. Only at the end of the hall, near the communal kitchen, lived a young student couple who were clearly renting. Their friends often came over, and the ruckus would usually last until morning. The vomit-stained floors in the hallway and the insects feasting on the vile substance were a common sight. The only things that saved me from all this filth were a sturdy metal door and double-sided tape that I stuck along the edges to keep the cockroaches out of my sanctuary. This is just a bit of background so you can understand the setting. The story isn't really about cockroaches or the horrors of communal living. It's about something else, about different horrors that began about a week ago. It was a late evening when I returned home from work. The hallway was filled with its usual atmosphere. Elderly women in housecoats gossiping in the kitchen, filling the air with cigarette smoke. At least it masked the constant stench of alcoholics and old age. "Good evening," I muttered and quickly went into my room, locking the door with 3 turns of the key. I immediately switched on the electric kettle. It was warm and cozy inside, and I had no desire to step outside again, but I had to since there was no shower in my room. After quickly taking care of business, I finally drank some hot tea and went to bed. My tired eyes closed instantly. I woke up several times during the night, which wasn't unusual for me. I'm a very light sleeper and can be woken by the slightest sound, no matter how exhausted I am. Sometimes it was the students making noise, other times it was the drunks right across from my room banging on the door, or something else. There were many reasons, but that night was different. A sound came from below me, so clear it was as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor, like a wardrobe or a dresser. I glanced at the clock with sleepy eyes. It was 1:30 in the morning. Have they completely lost their minds? I wondered. I threw on a robe and went to the toilet, which was at the end of the hall with the shower. I didn't know my neighbors and had no desire to get to know them. I saw no point in listening to their constant elderly complaints or gossip. I had a rough idea of who was who on our floor, but I had no clue who lived below me. The noise downstairs continued for a long time. I tossed and turned, hoping they would finally stop. It was the middle of the night, for God's sake, were they rearranging furniture? People had to get up for work early. I endured it for as long as I could. I wasn't going to go down and confront them, that's just my personality. I tolerate things until I can't anymore, and then everyone better watch out. That night, the only thing I did was bang on the radiator. It was a single, loud pipe, so my noisy neighbors couldn't have missed it. After a couple of minutes, the scraping sound from below thankfully stopped, and I took the opportunity to fall asleep. I didn't wake up again that night. Maybe they continued making noise, but at least I didn't hear it. The next morning was pretty standard: coffee, a cigarette, bag on my shoulder, and off to the bus. It was freezing outside, but luckily the bus stop wasn't far from my house. I was in such a hurry to catch the bus that it was only at the stop that I remembered seeing an old man peeking out from one of the rooms on the first floor, his door slightly ajar. I was going down the stairs when our eyes met, and it almost seemed like he was waiting for me. Judging by the location of the room, that's where the scraping noise had come from last night. Yes, that was the room, no doubt about it. My suspicions were confirmed when I returned home late that evening. Out of curiosity, I walked down the first floor hallway and noticed the door. It was a wooden door, ravaged by time, slightly rotten at the threshold. Cockroaches were crawling in and under it. Disgusting. That night, around the same time, I was woken up again by a horrible scraping sound. This time it seemed louder. That damn old man is dragging something again. For God's sake, you damned pensioner, how long can this go on? I muttered, rubbing my eyes and grabbing a slipper from the floor. I started banging it on the radiator with all my might. The scraping subsided but didn't stop. I kept hitting the radiator, hoping the old geezer would finally quiet down. It took another 5 minutes. When the noise finally ceased, I turned over and fell asleep. But the damned old man woke me up again. Judging by the clock, I hadn't been asleep for very long. This time, the scraping had been replaced by a moaning sound, as if I had ended up in a nursing home where everyone was in pain or had simply gone mad. I had neither the strength nor the desire to get out of my warm bed, get dressed, and go down to the first floor. So, I had to repeat the procedure with the slipper and the radiator, but this time it didn't help. I finally had to get up and go deal with it. To be honest, I had a feeling that some mentally challenged old man lived in that room, and whether I confronted him or not, it wouldn't make a difference. Still, I put on a jacket and pants, and, sleepy and angry, went down to the first floor. There was no doorbell on that door, so I had to knock. At first, I knocked politely, barely touching the disgusting door. But when I heard no footsteps behind it, I started banging seriously. Finally, I heard shuffling footsteps from deep within the room, followed by the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and an old man peeked out through a 1-inch gap. He just stood there, staring at me like a deer in headlights. "Excuse me," I said. "I understand you might be renovating or something. I don't know, but have you seen the time? Could you please not make so much noise? It's the middle of the night, and people have to get up for work. You're moving things around, moaning, it's all audible." He just stood there, staring intently into my eyes, his lips moving as if he wanted to say something. Then, in a barely audible, hoarse voice, he said, "Don't bang on the radiator." "Why are you banging? Are you kidding me, old man?" I raised my voice, getting bolder. "What do you mean, don't bang? You're doing God knows what down here in the middle of the night. I promise you, next time I'm calling the police." In response to my speech, the old man just slammed the door in my face. I went back up to my room. It was quiet. I lay down on my pillow, but I couldn't sleep anymore. That old coot had woken me up, and I had to be up for work in 4 hours. What could I do? I took out my phone and lay there, browsing the internet, hoping to fall asleep. The moans from the floor below started the moment I began to drift off. They were monotonous, heavy moans, but thankfully, they didn't manage to wake me up completely that time, and despite the damn sounds, I managed to fall asleep. The next day after work, I decided to ask my neighbors down the hall who lived in that room behind the other door. As usual, the kitchen was packed in the evening. I caught a moment when the local ladies gathered for a smoke break and approached them. "Excuse me," I said. They all turned their sagging faces towards me at once. I wanted to ask, "Do you happen to know who lives in room 17? It's on the first floor." "The first floor?" slurred the drunken voice of one of the neighbors. "Yes, on the first floor," I confirmed. They exchanged puzzled glances. "Well, I don't know, maybe someone moved in there again." "What do you mean?" "Well, no one's lived there for about 3 years now." "What's up? I can't sleep properly." "That's the room right below me. They're either moaning or moving something across the floor in the middle of the night. I've already been down to complain, and some old man opened the door." "What old man?" one of the neighbors asked, getting up from her creaky chair. "I didn't really see him. He just opened the door a crack and peeked out with one eye. And I saw him this morning when I was leaving for work, but I didn't get a good look." "Listen, Sasha, that's your name, right?" "Yes, Sasha. No one has lived there for 3 years. I doubt anyone has moved in." The woman who was telling me all this stood in front of me. By the way, she was the biggest fan of Hawthorne tincture and bootleg vodka, but I have to say, she seemed to sober up when I told her about the old man living downstairs. If he had relatives, they would have come by long ago. The room has been empty for almost 3 years. You can believe me, I've been living here for 20 years. That was certainly believable just by looking at her. Then who did I see? I wondered aloud. That, I don't know. Some devilry. Her words sent shivers down my spine. The thing is, an old man used to live there. He was a very old geezer. Lived and died. I can't say exactly when because I don't know. I only remember that there was a horrible stench, and they couldn't find the source for a long time. When they did, his body was already bloated, and worms were eating it. Maybe you saw him, her drinking buddies cackled. Right, alcohol is evil, I thought. I turned and went back to my room. Who am I listening to? Have I completely lost my mind? 3 drunk women with swollen faces, looking like they've been stung by bees, and I'm complaining to them about my life. I've really hit rock bottom. But still, after that conversation, a strange anxiety settled inside me. Every day, going up or down the stairs, I would glance at that very door of the supposedly empty room. And the moans and shuffling continued every night. And every night, I would bang on the radiator to make the old man quiet down. Soon, events began to unfold that I still can't wrap my head around. I think it all started after I called the police during one of the restless nights. Banging on the radiator didn't help, and neither did banging on his door. He just didn't open it. I had to call the cops. They arrived quickly, probably having coffee somewhere nearby. Two huge brutes entered the building and asked what had happened. I described the situation to them, and together we approached the ill-fated door again. They knocked. Silence in response. "Open up, police." There was no answer, as if there was really no one behind the door. The brutes politely explained to me that they wouldn't break down his door, as noise at night was not a sufficient reason. So they turned around and left. I went outside to get some nicotine. I lit a cigarette, and suddenly, to my right, a light turned on in the window. I looked over there. I saw the old man standing there. It was the first floor, so everything was perfectly visible. A very dim light bulb faintly illuminated the room, and he was standing by the wall. Aha, so that's how you do it, I thought, and quickly returned to the building. He must have seen the approaching car with its flashing lights and quickly pretended that no one was home. I went up to his door and started pounding on it. "Open up. What kind of comedy are you playing at?" This time, I must have pushed him too far, and the door soon opened, just like last time, into a small crack, showing only a part of his face. And then the crazy old man started rambling. "Why do you keep bothering me? Why do you bang on the radiator? You're living on borrowed time. You shouldn't disturb him. You shouldn't disturb him." With each word, his voice grew louder and soon turned into a scream that sent shivers all over my body, and I backed away towards the stairs. The door began to open gradually. I was already at the stairs when a hand appeared from the doorway. The dim light in the hallway was enough to see it. A dirty limb with long, peeling nails was trying to grope for something on the wall. In that instant, I ran up the stairs. In our hallway, I calmed down a bit. There were people there, unlike on the first floor. It was then that I asked myself, do all the residents of the first floor really put up with such a neighbor? Why doesn't anyone complain about him, or try to get through to him? I had never seen anyone do it. Although, I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen anyone on the first floor at all. I found the answers to all these questions very soon. The next morning, the same alcoholic woman who told me that no one lived in the apartment knocked on my door. She basically became my alarm clock. She wanted to ask for some change. She was short for a bottle. And yet, after the events of the previous night, I looked at her stories in a different light. I gave her money and began to question her in detail about who, what, and so on. She said that she had told me everything she knew in the kitchen that day. She only said that if there was someone there, it was better not to disturb him. Very witty. How am I supposed to sleep if that crazy thing is sitting there moaning all over the place? But what could be living there if, according to her, the room is empty, and the old man who lived there died a long time ago? Or did he not die? Wait, I don't understand anything. The woman, apparently happy, started to leave for the store, but I stopped her. Tell me, this old man, is he definitely dead? It was only then that I began to realize that something truly sinister was happening in this house. My doubts were confirmed when, in the middle of the night, someone knocked on my door. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the knock was quite persistent. And when I opened my eyes, it didn't disappear. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. Strange. I must have been dreaming after all. But as soon as I moved away from the door, the knock repeated. Damn it all. I quickly turned the key in the lock and opened the door. I looked out, first in one direction, then further down the hall. No one, only a flickering light bulb. On the other side, it had burned out completely, and half of the entire corridor was in darkness. Only the light in the kitchen was on. I stared into the darkness. 1 second, 2, 3. I stared and realized that there was someone right outside my door. Someone was standing there, breathing heavily. Suddenly, a silhouette began to emerge in the darkness, and I felt someone approaching me, getting very close. Something clicked in my head, and I tried to run back into my apartment and close the door, but someone was holding it from the other side, so strongly that I couldn't budge it an inch. At the same moment, a stench hit my nose, so strong that my head started to spin. I had already run into the room and flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. I grabbed my phone from the bed, but in those few seconds, it was no longer needed to see someone crossing the threshold of my home. The uninvited guest was approaching me, stumbling unsteadily, leaning against the wall. I swear to God, that's when I heard the moans I already knew. It was him. It was the dead old man from the downstairs apartment. I only turned away for a second to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight, but he had already moved right up to me, even though I was standing at the other end of the room. How did he cover several meters so quickly? I didn't hear his footsteps. That's when I saw him in all his glory, albeit for a fraction of a second. A pale, bloated, smelly old man surrounded by a swarm of flies. But it wasn't the flies that caught my attention, but his stomach. It was torn open, and his brown, completely rotten organs were almost falling out. He grabbed my head then with his disgusting, dirty hands. I tried to resist, tried to break free from his tight grip, hitting him wherever I could, but it had no effect. He dragged me to the radiator that I had constantly banged on for him, and squeezing my head tighter, he began to slam it against the iron pipe. A terrible pain in my forehead. The first blow. The second. I already felt blood flowing down my face. Then the third, fourth, and I lost consciousness. Honestly, I thought he was going to smash my head into pulp. I don't know how I survived. I only came to when my neighbors came into my open room and, seeing me in a pool of blood, called an ambulance. I remember the rest vaguely. I was in the hospital, in a nice ward. The police came several times to ask what had happened that night, but I couldn't explain anything clearly. They waited for me to recover. The doctors were all amazed at how I had survived with such injuries. Usually, people don't make it, one of the young nurses told me as she changed my dressing. If you think the story ends therewith, and they lived happily ever after, I have to disappoint you. In the hospital, I heard those moans too. No, I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't imagining it. I heard those sounds for real. And when I opened my eyes, he was standing in the corner of the ward, where, by the way, I was alone. He was mockingly tapping on the radiator, as if to remind me who he was and why all this had happened. By a happy coincidence, a nurse walked into the ward at that very moment, and when she turned on the light, he vanished. They moved some man who had been in a car accident in with me. It was probably thanks to him that the old man didn't appear in the ward anymore. When I was finally discharged, I returned to the dormitory, packed all my belongings, and moved to another house. I rented an apartment in a different place. It was old, of course, but at least it was without such incidents. I put my little room up for sale. Now I was afraid of every rustle. Even in the new apartment, I slept with the lights on and was afraid to see him again, to hear those cursed moans. But thank God, everything was quiet. He didn't bother me, at least for now. But here's what I found out when I returned to the dormitory about a week later to pick up some things I hadn't had time to take the first time. I overheard a conversation between my neighbors in the communal kitchen. As it turned out, the first floor of our dormitory was not very populated. Almost all the rooms were empty. People lived in only 3 of them. I don't know who they were, but it was rumored that these people were found in that very room. They were found because of the stench that filled the entire floor. And by the way, I noticed it too. It hadn't had time to air out by the time I arrived. Apparently, they also disliked the old man's loud moans and risked knocking on his door to express their dissatisfaction, just like I did. Only they were less fortunate.